So E3G's mission is a safe climate for all. And that's a very deliberately phrase, not just because it works in all the languages which we have in E3G, which are many, but also because we wanted to get at something which was quite human. So a safe climate means a climate under which all humans on the planet can flourish, that they are not restricted in their ability to prosper, to have security, to have their basic rights by climate volatility. So it's not just about limiting climate change, it's also about building resilience and giving them access to the resources everywhere. We don't think an elite or exclusionary approach to solving climate change is an acceptable one. And we also think it's not a credible one. We don't think you can actually get the cooperation you need to solve climate change for everyone unless everybody feels they're getting a fair deal. At its simplest, E3G tries to make the necessary possible by understanding the big decisions that have to be made, then looking and seeing what needs to happen, who needs to be aligned, what solutions need to be created to make those decisions possible. We do nothing alone. We are only able to do what we can do by working with others and helping others work together. Our super skill, it is convening very disparate groups to work together towards common goals. In the end, we only solve climate change through international cooperation, and we see ourselves, one of our roles as building the sinews of that cooperation at quite a deep level, working with our partners and making sure that both sides of the equation understand each other and have the best possible plans and propositions and analysis to underpin their cooperation. If anybody tells you they know how to get to a net zero resilient society, after 30 years I can tell you they are fibbing, because we have not invented that pathway yet, and it's our job to be part of the group that does that. And that is a great honour and privilege to be part of that, but it comes with responsibilities to make sure you're as honest with yourself and each other about what's going on as you can be, and that requires a culture that values honesty and vulnerability and openness at all levels. The purpose of E3G in a way was very simple. It was to try and drive change at ecological pace, not human pace. All of us were working in government. All of us came from very different backgrounds, but all had the similar mission and frustration to go from the words we were seeing politicians utter to actually make those real in the world. Because we're quite good at changing at the pace we feel comfortable with, but the climate doesn't care about what we're comfortable with. It cares about its own pace, its own dynamics. And we saw this massive gap between what was necessary and what was possible with the systems for politics and institutional change and policy we were working in at the time in government. We realised if we were going to actually take this issue seriously, we needed to do something very different. Take the leap into the unknown and build an organisation that could really make things happen. Tom Burke, who was the senior partner, he was at the 1972 Stockholm Environment Conference, which really kicked off the global environment movement. And he had seen the first generation of environmentalists who were really conservationists, protecting wild species in wild places, and been there on the cusp as that changed to second generation environmentalists in around the 60s and 70s, the protest movement, the anti-pollution movement, the very outsider movements. And those two movements built consciousness of the role of environment in human life and created a whole generation of people in mainstream roles who cared. But they couldn't do anything because they weren't joined up. So we set up third generation environmentalism really to address those people, the people who were activated and mobilized by the first two generations, standing on their shoulders to say, okay, now work with us to actually pull the real levers of power to make the real change to address these problems. We always used to say if you hadn't have a headache at the end of an E3G conversation, you weren't trying hard. But that's because the issues were really hard. We were really doing frontier thinking. People can respectfully disagree, often quite vehemently, but we're all doing it because we're passionate about a single mission, but we all come at it from different dimensions. And so the most junior person to the most senior person, could all argue it out. That's the spirit we want to bring back. One of my proudest pieces of running E3G is seeing us create institutions and coalitions that carry on. We started off creating coalitions around areas like energy efficiency and the Green Investment Bank in the UK, where we built a very large coalition. These tended to be on short time periods, but then we realized we needed to have a more architectural approach. So we built a global coalition after the Copenhagen COP of people working on climate diplomacy. We've then moved into more kind of sectoral areas, so we helped set up the Powering Past Coal Alliance, which is a coalition of countries and cities and businesses committed to phasing out coal. And more recently, we've moved into areas like working around the reform of the multilateral development banks, like the World Bank, but also the Transition Plan Task Force, which supports companies to produce transition plans consistent with 1.5 degrees in a way that is transparent and understandable. And then finally, we're very proud that some of our alumni of E3G have set up kind of partner organizations we've worked with now, ECHO in Italy and IMAL in Morocco. We hope to see more of them because we really encourage our staff to go and build their own institutions in their own spaces, which we can then work with as a network. When I started working on climate change 30 years ago, we thought we'd hit 6 degrees by 2100, and some people thought that was safe and we could adapt to it. What's happened is we've done a lot, we've produced a lot of clean technology. We now think we might get to 2.5 degrees by 2100, but the scientists now think that's completely unsafe, and that's a consensus. So we have done a lot more than I thought we would do in terms of shifting the economy, but the risks of climate change are a lot worse than anybody thought 30 years ago. And I think that's part of the paradox we're going to have to live with going forward. We are quite likely to peak global emissions this year, but also, of course, still have the hottest and most dangerous year ever. We are successfully changing the economy, if not fast enough, but everything is still getting worse. And keeping people engaged and feeling they have agency through that process is going to be really hard. So how do you keep attention in a world of Instagram and TikTok? And that's just the politicians. For all the positives about clean technology, for all the positives about people mobilizing, and the fact that most people in the world, in most countries, like 95% of countries want to act, the next stage is going to feel a lot harder, partly because it's a lot more real. The environment movement has stopped many bad things happening, but to solve climate change, we have to build a totally new economy that doesn't damage the environment. And that is a fundamentally different task, and it raises fundamental challenges. But it's also one of the most inspiring, purposeful, and amazing things any generation can do. So building, not stopping, is what I tell people, and it's what I find people get excited by.